Walk into any dispensary today and pick up the most expensive jar on the shelf. Look real close at the bud, and you'll see it's completely covered in these tiny white crystals, like somebody dusted it in powdered sugar. And that frost on it is what everybody wants to see now. It's a way you can tell the good stuff from the cheap stuff before you can even smell it. But it wasn't always like that, because there was a time when weed had almost none of that, and the whole idea of weed being frosty just didn't exist. This is the story of Snowcap. So the first thing you've got to know about Snowcap is what that frost actually is, because it's not sugar and it's not dust. Those tiny little crystals are called trichomes, and they're basically tiny factories the plant grows all over its flowers. And here's what they do. Every bit of the good stuff in weed, the THC that gets you high, the CBD, and the terpenes that create all the smell and flavor, all of it gets made and stored inside those trichomes. So when you're looking at a frosted over bud, you're not looking at decoration. You're looking at where all the active ingredients actually live. And because that's where everything lives, the trichomes are also what tells a grower exactly when to harvest. And they're tiny, so growers have to watch them under a little jeweler's loupe. And what they're looking for is the color, because that changes as the plant ripens. So they start out clear and glassy, then turn cloudy and milky, and eventually go amber, like a little drop of honey. And where they are in that cycle tells you everything you need to know, because cloudy usually means the THC is at its peak, and amber means it's starting to tip over into a more sleepy, sedative effect. So a good grower is out there with that loupe, watching the color, waiting for the exact right moment to cut the plant down. And some strains just pack on way more trichomes than others. And Snowcap is one of the frostiest there is, so that's exactly where the name comes from. It grows so much of that white coverage, the whole bud ends up looking dipped in ice. And the buds come out looking like the peak of a snow-capped mountain. It has this bright green flower buried under a solid coat of white frost. And long spear-shaped colas, orange hairs poking through. And on top of that, the whole thing just is glittering. It looks cold. And that's the entire reason it's called what it's called. So let's talk about where it came from. And I have to be straight with you right up front, because this is where the honest version and the marketing version split apart. The truth is, nobody actually knows exactly what Snowcap is. Its genetics were never DNA tested, and the story of who made it and how has two completely different versions that don't line up. The first version credits a California seed company and says Snowcap came from crossing a strain called Snow White with a male of another strain. It's a clean story, has specific parents, and the whole thing just sounds factual, right? Well, see, the problem is it only really exists in seed catalog descriptions, and nobody's ever actually showed a breeder who said, "Hey, I made this." As for the second version, it's older and comes from growers who were actually there. They say Snowcap wasn't grown from seed at all. They say it was a clone-only cutting that came out of Humboldt and Mendocino counties up in Northern California around 2002, and that it was some kind of haze crossed with an unknown sativa. And the fact they said clone only matters, because it means every real Snowcap plant is a physical cutting off one original mother, not something you can grow from a packet of seeds. So here's why those two stories can't both be true. One says it came from seeds. The other says it only ever existed as a clone. And those are opposite things. So what you're probably looking at is two different plants that ended up sharing the same name, which happens more in weed than anybody likes to admit. So I'm not going to pretend to know something nobody can prove. But what I can actually say, though, is this. We might not know Snowcap's family tree, but we know exactly how it looks, how it smells, and how it hits. And all three of those point straight at one thing: haze. You can tell it's haze the second you smell it. Snowcap has this bright lemon and citrus smell up front, but then it also has a cool menthol note underneath, almost like mint or eucalyptus, with some pine in there too. And that cooling menthol thing is its signature. It's what separates it from all the sweet candy strains you see everywhere now. And as for the smell, it comes from the terpenes, which are those aromatic oils I mentioned that get stored in the trichomes. The main one in Snowcap is called terpinolene, and that's a big clue, because terpinolene is the same terpene that runs through the classic haze strains like Jack Herer. So, even though nobody can hand you the paperwork on its genetics, the plant itself is basically telling you where it came from. And on top of that, the high matches the smell. Snowcap is a sativa, so it's energetic, uplifting, and heady. It's definitely a daytime weed. It makes you talkative and creative and giggly, and it doesn't glue you to the couch the way a heavy indica does. As for its strength, it usually tests somewhere in the high teens to low 20s for THC, which is respectable. Though I'll be honest, that number bounces around depending on which version you got and who grew it. So that's Snowcap. But the real story here is bigger than one strain, because to understand why a frosted over bud is worth more money today, you have to understand what weed used to look like. And it looked nothing like this. Go back to the 1960s and 70s, for example. Almost all the weed in America was imported, pressed into bricks, and shipped up from Mexico and Colombia. They called it brickweed, and it was rough. It was brown, it was full of seeds and stems, and it was weak. We're talking about weed that averaged around 2% THC. Some of it, according to the government's own testing, was under 1%. There was no frost on it at all. And nobody was inspecting the trichomes, because there weren't any to inspect. Then came the thing that changed everything, and it's called sinsemilla. Sinsemilla is a Spanish word that just means without seeds. Here's the idea. A cannabis plant is male or female, and if a male pollinates a female, that female spends all her energy making seeds. But if you keep the males away, that female has nothing to make seeds with. So instead, she pours all that energy into resin and flower. And resin means trichomes. So when domestic growers in California and Oregon started pulling the males out and growing seedless female plants, the bud that came off those plants was a completely different animal. It was frostier, stronger, and covered in the trichomes that the old brickweed never had. The potency jumped from that 2% brickweed up into the double digits. And for the first time, weed grown in America was blowing away everything getting imported. And that's the exact moment frost started to mean something. Because now there were two kinds of weed side by side. Brown, seedy, weak brickweed on one side, and frosty, seedless, strong domestic bud on the other. And you could tell them apart just by looking. The frost became the visual proof that you were holding the good stuff. Then one strain took that idea and blew it up worldwide. In 1995, a strain called White Widow won the High Times Cannabis Cup over in Amsterdam. And White Widow was so completely caked in white trichomes that it looked like it had been rolled in sugar. That's literally where its name came from. It won the biggest competition in weed, and overnight, frost wasn't just a sign of quality, it was the goal. After that, every breeder started chasing it. And you can see it in the names they picked: White Widow, White Rhino, Great White Shark, Snow White, and yeah, Snowcap. Suddenly, everything was white, or snow, or crystal, or frost. Those words became a promise. If it had one of those names, it was telling you to expect a thick coat of trichomes. And this is where Snowcap fits into the bigger picture. It came up on the West Coast in that exact same wave, an American cousin to those Amsterdam frost strains, carrying the same idea in its name. Frost equals quality. Then the cameras made it worse, or better, depending on how you look at it. Once cannabis got legal and dispensaries opened up, marketing kicked in hard. photographers started shooting these extreme close-up macro shots of buds, where you can see every single trichome glittering. That became the whole look of premium weed. And then social media poured the gas on it, because everybody started posting glittering close-ups, and buyers started expecting that frosted look before they'd spend real money. In the business, they call it bag appeal, and it's now a real thing that drives what sells. So does Snowcap still exist? Yeah, but it's more of a respected old-school strain now than a headliner. You'll still find it on West Coast menus, and people who know weed still love it for that lemon menthol smell and that clean daytime high. It's a heritage strain in a market that's mostly chasing sweet dessert flavors these days. But the idea Snowcap stood for didn't fade. It took over completely. Because right now the hottest thing in high-end weed is solventless hash and rosin, which is where they press the trichomes off the plant and smoke basically just that. Think about what that means. The entire top of the market is now built on trichomes. Growers are hunting down the frostiest, most resin-heavy plants they can find, on purpose, because those trichomes are worth more than the flower itself. Now, I do want to leave you with one honest thing, because it matters. Frost is a great sign, but it's not a guarantee. A thick coat of trichomes tells you the plant made a lot of resin, and that usually means good terpenes and good potency. But it doesn't automatically mean the highest THC. The genetics set the ceiling, and two equally frosty buds can test totally different. Frost tells you the plant put in the work. It doesn't promise you a number. Anybody who tells you frostier always means stronger is just selling you something. So at the end of the day, Snowcap is a strain that wore its whole philosophy right there in its name. It came up on the West Coast, covered in more frost than almost anything around it, at the exact time the whole culture was deciding that frost is how you spot quality. And that idea won. Every macro photo, every dispensary jar you inspect, every rosin press squeezing trichomes into gold, all of it traces back to the moment weed figured out that the good stuff sparkles.